It all started when I moved into the old house in the countryside. The rent was cheap, and the house, though old, had a charm to it. A creaky staircase, wide wooden floors, and an attic full of forgotten history. At first, it felt cozy, like a place where I could finally relax after years of busy city life. The first few nights were quiet, but on the fourth night, something strange happened. I woke up to the sound of footsteps above me. Slow, deliberate creaks, like someone was pacing in the attic. At first, I thought it was just the old house settling, but the sound continued, a steady rhythm back and forth over and over. I tried to ignore it, pulling the blankets over my head and telling myself it was just my imagination. The next morning, I decided to check the attic. I pulled down the old wooden ladder and climbed up, half expecting to find some animal trapped up there. The attic was dimly lit, full of dust and old boxes, but nothing seemed out of place. No signs of animals, nothing unusual, just the stale smell of forgotten memories. That night, the footsteps returned. They were louder this time, closer. I could hear them right above my bed, like someone was standing still, waiting for me to react. My heart raced, but I forced myself to stay calm. It's just the house, I told myself again, even though the thought didn't bring much comfort anymore. The next few nights, the footsteps continued, but that wasn't all. I began hearing whispers, soft, almost unintelligible murmurs, like someone was trying to speak but couldn't quite form the words. It was unsettling, to say the least. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I couldn't sleep, the whispers growing louder. So, I climbed up into the attic again, this time armed with a flashlight. As I swept the beam of light across the space, something caught my eye. In the far corner of the attic, behind an old wardrobe, there was a small door. I had never noticed it before. The door was old, the paint peeling off, and it looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. My hands shook as I reached for the handle, turning it slowly. The door creaked open, revealing a small, windowless room. Inside, there was nothing but a single chair facing the wall. That's when I felt it. A cold breeze, though there were no windows or vents. The air around me grew heavy, and for the first time, I had the distinct feeling I wasn't alone. My flashlight flickering as if the batteries were dying. And then I saw it. A shadow, faint but unmistakable, standing just at the edge of the beam of light. It was tall, with the vague outline of a person. But there was something wrong about it, something that made every hair on my body stand on end. I backed out of the room as quickly as I could, slamming the small door shut behind me. The next morning, I decided I couldn't stay in the house any longer. I packed my things and called my friend Emily, asking if I could stay with her for a few days. As I was leaving, though, something strange happened. I found an old photograph in the hallway, lying face down on the floor. When I picked it up, I realized it was a picture of the house from what must have been 100 years ago. Standing in front of the house was a family. A man, a woman, and a little girl. The man was tall, with a stern expression, and he looked eerily similar to the shadow I had seen in the attic. For some reason, seeing that photo brought me a sense of calm. I don't know why, but I suddenly felt like the presence in the attic wasn't angry or harmful. It was just there, watching, maybe even protecting the house in its own way. I stood there, staring at the old photograph, trying to make sense of it all. The resemblance between the man in the picture and the shadow I'd seen in the attic was undeniable. But instead of fear, something inside me softened. I wondered who they were, this family, and what had happened to them. For the first time since the footsteps began, I wasn't filled with dread. I felt a strange connection to the house, to its history. Maybe the man in the attic wasn't haunting me. Maybe he was tied to the house, unable to leave, simply looking after it the way I had tried to. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces started to fall into place. That night, I didn't hear the footsteps. The house was unusually quiet, almost peaceful, as if whatever restless energy had been haunting it had finally found a sense of calm. I couldn't explain it, but I slept deeply, undisturbed for the first time in weeks. The next morning, I decided to visit the local historical society. I was curious now, not scared. I needed to know more about the family in the photo. The old librarian was more than happy to help, and after some digging, we found records of the house and its former owners. The family in the picture was the Halloways. They had lived in the house in the early 1900s. Mr. Halloway, the tall man with the stern face, had been a respected but strict man in the town. His wife, Margaret, was known to be kind but often frail, and they had a young daughter named Evelyn. From what I gathered, their lives seemed normal enough. There was no mention of any tragedy or scandal. But when I asked about the attic, the librarian hesitated for a moment. "Ah, the attic," she said quietly. "There was always a rumor, nothing proven, of course. But some say Mr. Halloway was a bit particular about that part of the house. It was said that after his wife passed, he would spend hours up there alone. Some believe he never truly left the house, even after he was gone." The librarian's words stayed with me as I drove back to the house. I couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Halloway, the stern shadow in the attic, wasn't haunting the place in a traditional sense. Maybe he was just staying, guarding something or someone. When I got home, I went back up to the attic one last time. The air felt different, lighter, almost inviting. I walked over to the small door where I had seen the shadow, half expecting to feel that cold presence again. But there was nothing. I opened the door and stepped into the tiny room, and that's when I saw it. Tucked behind the chair, covered in dust, was a small wooden box. It looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. I hesitated for a moment, then opened it carefully. Inside were old letters, yellowed with age, addressed to Evelyn Halloway. They were written by Mr. Halloway. The letters weren't what I expected. They weren't harsh or filled with the sternness I imagined from the man in the photo. Instead, they were full of love and regret. It seemed Mr. Halloway had been away a lot during his daughter's childhood, working to support the family. The last letter, dated just a few weeks before his passing, was the hardest to read. It was a simple plea for forgiveness. "I am sorry, Evelyn. I know I was not always there when you needed me. But know this, I have always watched over you and I always will, no matter where I am." Tears filled my eyes as I realized what had been happening. The footsteps, the whispers, they weren't meant to scare me. They were remnants of a father's love, of a promise unfulfilled, lingering in the only place he felt close to his family. He wasn't angry. He was just there, still watching over his home, over the memory of those he loved. I put the letters back in the box and closed it gently, feeling a deep sense of closure. As I climbed down from the attic, I knew I had nothing to fear anymore. The house wasn't haunted in the way I had thought. It was simply filled with the echoes of a love that had lasted beyond life. As I descended the attic ladder, a strange calm washed over me, the kind that comes after facing something unknown and realizing it was never meant to harm you. I had spent weeks being afraid of the sounds, the whispers, the shadow, but now everything made sense. The house had held onto the memory of a father's love for his daughter. Nothing more, nothing sinister. The rest of the house felt different too. The creaking of the floorboards under my feet didn't sound eerie anymore. The wind that rattled the old windows wasn't unsettling, but familiar, almost like the house was breathing. Felt alive in a way, but not in the way that scared me. I spent the next few hours packing up the last of my things. My lease was ending soon, and while I had made peace with the house, I knew it was time to move on. There was a bittersweetness to leaving, As much as I wanted to escape the unsettling experiences, I couldn't help but feel a connection to the history I had uncovered. I felt like I had been part of their story, even if just for a short while. Before I left, I made one last trip up to the attic. I don't know why, but I felt like I needed to say goodbye. The small door in the corner stood slightly ajar, just as I had left it. I knelt down and opened it fully, placing my hand on the old wooden chair that sat inside the tiny room. I hope you found peace. For a moment, everything was still. And then, just as I turned to leave, I felt a faint brush of air pass by me. It wasn't cold or alarming. It was soft, gentle, like a breath. I stood there for a second, not scared, just aware. A quiet acknowledgement, as if the house, or perhaps something more, was saying goodbye in return. I left the attic for the final time, a weight lifting from my shoulders. The rest of the day went by quickly as I finished packing, called for a moving van, and tied up loose ends. As I locked the door behind me, I took one last look at the house. The afternoon sun bathed it in a warm glow, making it look almost inviting, as if welcoming its next chapter. Life returned to normal after I moved out. I settled into a new apartment in the city, far away from creaky attics and ghostly whispers. Yet, every now and then, my mind would drift back to the house and I would wonder. I wondered if anyone else who lived there after me would hear the footsteps or feel the presence of Mr. Holloway. Or maybe, just maybe, the house would remain quiet now. A few months later, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting on the envelope was neat, unfamiliar. Inside was a short note from the new tenants who had moved into the house. "We wanted to thank you," the letter began. "The previous owner told us you left behind some notes about the history of the house. We found the letters in the attic, the ones from Mr. Holloway to his daughter. We don't know how to explain it, but ever since we found them, the house feels different, more at peace. We thought you should know." I smiled as I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. Whatever haunted the house wasn't haunting it anymore. Maybe the discovery of those letters had allowed the past to finally rest. Maybe Mr. Holloway had finally let go, knowing his story had been heard. I never went back to the house, but I like to think that the Holloway's legacy, their love, remains there in a different way now, quiet, gentle, and at peace. And as for me, I no longer question what I believe. Sometimes the most inexplicable things don't need answers. They just need to be understood. Months passed since I received that letter from the new tenants. Life carried on in its usual rhythm. Work, friends, weekend plans. But a small part of me couldn't stop thinking about the house and the strange experience I'd had there. I would catch myself replaying those moments in my head. The footsteps, the shadow, the letters. Felt like a chapter of my life I hadn't fully closed. Then, one evening, something happened that made me wonder if the story wasn't quite over. It was a rainy night, the kind where the sound of the water drumming against the window makes everything feel a little more distant. I was curled up on the couch, reading, when my phone buzzed with a message from Emily, the friend I'd stayed with briefly after leaving the house. We hadn't talked much about the whole ordeal, but she knew the basics. "Hey," her message read, "I know this is going to sound weird, but I just drove by your old place. Something strange happened." I frowned, a knot forming in my stomach. I quickly called her, needing to hear more. "What's going on?" I asked when she picked up. "Is everything okay?" Emily hesitated. I don't know how to explain it. Something was pulling me toward the house. But the weirdest thing? I thought I saw someone standing at the attic window. It was just for a second the house looked different, like it was waiting. A cold shiver ran down my spine, but I tried to shake it off. "It's probably nothing," I said, though my voice wavered slightly. Maybe the new tenants were just in the attic, looking for something. Maybe, Emily said, though I could hear the doubt in her voice. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing in particular. I tried to dismiss it, that whatever presence had been there was at peace now. But Emily's words lingered in the back of my mind for days. Why would the attic window be open again? And why had she felt drawn to the house in the first place? A week later, I couldn't resist the urge any longer. I had to see it for myself. One Sunday afternoon, I drove back to the old house. I told myself it was just to visit the area, maybe take a walk down memory lane, but deep down I knew I was looking for answers. As I pulled up to the street, the sight of the house hit me like a punch to the chest. It looked exactly as I remembered it. Quaint, with its peeling white paint and wide front porch. But there was something in the air that felt heavy, as though the past still lingered. The attic window was closed. For a moment I felt silly. I parked the car and stepped out, not really knowing what I was looking for. I stood across the street, staring at the house, when something strange caught my eye. It was subtle, but the curtains in the attic window, those thin, almost transparent ones, moved ever so slightly. There was no wind. I blinked, telling myself it could have been a draft, or maybe someone inside the house had walked by, causing the movement. But as I watched, I realized something. The house was empty. No cars in the driveway, no lights on. The new tenants had gone somewhere, but that faint movement in the attic told a different story. Before I could think better of it, I crossed the street and walked up to the front door. I wasn't planning to knock. I just needed to be near it, to feel that sense of closure I had thought I found months ago. But as I stood on the porch, that familiar chill crept up my spine again. It wasn't fear exactly, but a sense that the house was aware of me. I stepped back, about to turn and leave, when the front door creaked open slightly, as if nudged from the inside. My heart pounded, but something inside me urged me forward. Slowly, I pushed the door open further and stepped inside. The house was silent, the air thick with stillness. Dust floated in the light filtering through the windows. I called out, but there was no answer. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but something pulled me toward the stairs, the ones leading up to the attic. Each step creaked as I climbed, the memories of that first night flooding back. I reached the attic door, hesitating for just a moment, before slowly pulling down the ladder and climbing up. The attic was exactly as I had left it, except for one thing. The small wooden box, the one I had found the letters in, was sitting in the middle of the floor, lid slightly ajar. I hadn't left it there. I knelt down and opened it fully. Inside, on top of the old letters, was a new piece of paper. It was folded neatly, the edges crisp, as if it had just been placed there. With trembling hands, I unfolded it and read the single sentence written in neat, careful handwriting. "Thank you for helping me find my way home." A wave of emotion hit me, and I don't know if it was relief, sadness, or something in between. Whatever had been tied to the house, Mr. Halloway, his love, his regret, had finally moved on. I left the house that day knowing it was truly over. There were no more whispers, no more footsteps, no shadows lurking in the attic. The house was finally at peace, and so was I. And as I drove away, I couldn't help but smile, feeling as though I had been part of something much bigger than myself. Something that had begun long before I ever stepped foot in that house, and something that had finally found its end.